Sometimes the kindest thing a man can do is open a door he knows will ruin his life. Rain hammered against the tin roof of Ethan Walker's barn hard enough to rattle the old light fixtures hanging from the rafters. The storm had rolled across the frontier plains an hour earlier, turning the dirt roads outside into rivers of black mud under the pale glow of distant moons. Inside the barn, the air smelled of wet hay, diesel fuel, and overheated machinery. Ethan wiped grease across the sleeve of his flannel jacket as he leaned beneath the rusted engine block of his tractor, tightening the final bolt with numb fingers. The machine groaned once before falling silent again. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. "That makes two of us." The old radio sitting on a wooden shelf crackled with static beside him. A woman's voice pushed through the interference. "Emergency advisory remains active across Sector 12. Residents are instructed to report any unidentified off-world travelers immediately. Repeat. Failure to comply." The signal dissolved into hissing noise. Ethan reached over and shut it off. Silence returned except for the storm and the soft ticking of cooling metal. He hadn't seen another human in almost 8 days. That was frontier life. Out here, people disappeared quietly. Sometimes by choice. Sometimes not. He grabbed his thermos from the workbench and took a sip of stale coffee just as a sharp metallic clang echoed from the far end of the barn. Ethan froze. The sound hadn't come from the storm. It came from inside. Slowly, he set the thermos down. His eyes drifted toward the old shotgun hanging beside the tool cabinet. Another sound followed. A weak scrape against concrete. Then breathing. Uneven. Painfully shallow. Ethan picked up the shotgun and stepped carefully past the tractor, his boots crunching over scattered straw. The hanging light above swayed slightly from the wind leaking through gaps in the barn walls, throwing long shadows across the stalls. "If you're looking to steal something," he called out calmly, "you picked the wrong farm. Only thing worth money in here is the heater." No answer. He moved closer, one step at a time. Then he saw the blood. Silver. Tiny drops glimmering against the concrete floor beneath the storage loft ladder. Ethan stopped cold. Every instinct told him to walk away. Frontier law was simple about alien matters. If you found one injured, you reported it. If you hid one, federal patrols assumed you were trafficking. And trafficking charges didn't end with prison. Another weak sound drifted through the dark. Ethan raised the shotgun slightly and rounded the corner beneath the loft. A figure sat pressed against the wooden support beams between stacks of hay bales. Female. Alien. Tall even while sitting down. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly beneath the hanging light, streaked with rainwater and dirt. Long silver hair clung to her shoulders in wet strands. One of her legs was stretched awkwardly across the floor, dark fabric torn open near the knee where silver blood continued dripping onto the concrete. But that wasn't what held Ethan still. It was the knife in her hand, a thin plasma blade no longer than his forearm, trembling violently as she pointed it toward him. Her golden eyes locked onto his with exhausted fury. "Don't," she whispered. Her voice cracked from cold and exhaustion. "Don't come closer, human." Ethan studied her quietly. The blade shook harder. Not because she was threatening him, because she could barely hold it up anymore. Then he noticed the burn marks along her ankle. Circular. Mechanical. Like something had been attached there recently. A tracking shackle. The alien girl shifted suddenly, trying to push herself upright. Pain flashed across her face the moment pressure hit her injured leg. She stumbled sideways against the wooden beam with a sharp breath. Ethan lowered the shotgun first. The storm outside growled across the plains while the old barn heater clicked softly behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan reached over, grabbed the rusted metal stool beside the tractor, and slowly slid it across the floor toward her. "Sit before you pass out," he said quietly. The alien stared at him in disbelief. "You should call the authorities." Ethan glanced at the silver blood on the floor, then at the rain pouring through the cracks. "In the roof." "Yeah," he said. "Probably." But he walked past the radio anyway. The alien girl watched him cross the barn through the haze of exhaustion. Her glowing eyes narrowed with suspicion as Ethan ignored the emergency radio entirely. He moved with the slow confidence of someone too tired to be afraid anymore. The old heater near the tractor rattled louder when he kicked its rusted side with his boot, and warm air finally drifted across the freezing barn in weak, uneven waves. Outside, thunder rolled over the plains like distant artillery. Ethan crouched beside an old storage cabinet and pulled out a faded metal first aid box. "That leg needs cleaning," he said without looking at her. "Otherwise you are going to lose it." Her grip tightened around the plasma knife. Do not pretend concern, human. Ethan opened the box with a metallic snap. You always this friendly when somebody lets you bleed on their floor? She stared at him silently. Up close, he could see how young she actually was beneath the hardened expression. Not a child, but not much older than 25 either by human standards. Rainwater dripped from strands of silver hair onto her torn dark coat. The fabric looked expensive despite the damage, stitched with faint silver threading that reflected the barn light whenever she moved. Military maybe, or something richer than military. Ethan grabbed a clean towel from the shelf beside him and tossed it gently toward her. Pressure on the wound, he said. Silver blood might look pretty, but it stains concrete like hell. The towel landed beside her boot. She hesitated before slowly picking it up. Her movements were careful now, guarded less by aggression than pain. Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she pressed the cloth against her injured leg. You are not reporting me, she said quietly after a long silence. Nope. Why? Ethan shrugged while digging through medical supplies. Bad habit, probably. You do not even know what I am. You are cold, limping, and hiding in my barn during a thunderstorm. That is enough information for tonight. The alien looked genuinely unsettled by that answer. Ethan stood and walked toward an old sink near the back wall, filling a dented metal bowl with steaming water from a rusted utility kettle. The barn lights flickered once overhead. Frontier power grid, always failing during storms. He carried the bowl back carefully and set it down several feet away from her. Close enough to help, far enough not to threaten. I can clean it myself, she said immediately. Ethan nodded once. Good. Saves me trouble. Her eyes narrowed again, confused by his lack of pressure. Most people pushed. Frontier traders pushed. Patrol officers pushed. Criminals pushed hardest of all. But Ethan simply sat down on an overturned crate beside the tractor and unscrewed the lid from his thermos. Steam drifted into the cold air between them. Coffee, he offered. I do not know what that is. Trust me, neither does the government anymore. For the first time, something almost human flickered across her face. Not quite amusement, but close. Ethan noticed it immediately. The silence stretched while rain pounded the roof above them. Somewhere outside, the windmill creaked rhythmically in the storm. The alien finally dipped the towel into the warm water and cleaned the wound along her leg with visible restraint. Ethan pretended not to watch, though his eyes kept drifting toward the ugly circular burn around her ankle. Definitely a tracking restraint. Definitely military grade. Whoever had chained her had resources. You cut it off yourself, he said eventually. Her expression hardened again. The tracker. She looked down at the damaged skin around her ankle. I did not have a choice. Who was chasing you? She met his eyes across the dim barn. People you should stay far away from. Ethan leaned back against the crate with a soft sigh. Lady, I live 300 miles from the nearest grocery store. I already stay far away from everybody. Another silence settled over them. Softer this time. Less sharp. Then suddenly every light inside the barn dimmed at once. Ethan looked up instinctively toward the ceiling as a low mechanical hum vibrated through the structure. Not thunder. Something heavier. Something artificial. The alien girl went completely still. Her golden eyes widened with unmistakable fear as pale blue light swept briefly through the cracks in the barn walls from somewhere high above the clouds. Ethan stood slowly. That yours? He asked quietly. Her voice came barely above a whisper. They found me faster than I thought. The mechanical hum deepened until the loose tools hanging along the barn wall began to vibrate softly against the wood. Ethan stepped toward the nearest window and wiped condensation from the dirty glass with the back of his hand. At first he saw nothing except rain sweeping sideways across the fields beyond the fence line. Then a pale beam of blue light slid silently through the clouds overhead like the eye of something enormous searching the ground. His stomach tightened immediately. Not patrol craft. Military. Real military. The kind that did not land on forgotten farms unless something valuable had gone missing. Behind him, the alien girl struggled to stand too quickly and nearly collapsed against the support beam again. Ethan turned in time to catch the edge of the metal bowl before it tipped over across the floor. Easy, he muttered. You are injured. You do not understand, she whispered sharply. If they are using atmospheric scanners already, then they are close. Ethan glanced toward the ceiling as another pulse of blue light swept over the roof. The barn heater flickered weakly beneath the pressure of whatever electromagnetic field hovered above them. Friends of yours? He asked. No, the answer came too fast. Too honest. Ethan studied her quietly for a moment. Fear changed people. He had seen it before back during his cargo transport years near the outer colonies. Most people became loud when they were afraid, desperate, panicked. But this girl became smaller somehow, quieter, like she had spent a long time learning how to disappear. She pushed damp silver hair away from her face and reached toward the plasma knife again, though her hand trembled badly now from exhaustion. You should leave, she said, before they scan your property. Ethan gave a tired exhale through his nose. Little late for that. Human authorities cooperate with the Empire on frontier worlds. Harboring me will destroy your life. My tractor already destroyed my life. She blinked at him in visible confusion. Ethan walked toward the electrical panel near the barn doors and flipped 2 rusted switches downward. Half the remaining lights inside immediately died, plunging the far side of the barn into darkness. What are you doing? She asked, making this place look abandoned. Outside, the rain intensified hard enough to blur the windows completely. Ethan could barely make out the old windmill turning slowly near the fence line under flashes of distant lightning. He crossed back toward the workbench and pulled open a lower drawer filled with old engine parts, power cables, and farming tools. After a moment, he found what he wanted. A heavy thermal tarp coated in dust. Here, he said, tossing it toward her carefully. Cover the heat signature. She caught it awkwardly. Why are you helping me? Ethan paused. The question lingered strangely in the cold air between them. Nobody had asked him that in a long time. Not since before frontier life hollowed everybody out into survivors. He rubbed one rough hand along his jaw before answering. Because somebody should. The alien stared at him as though the answer physically hurt her to hear. Then another sound rolled through the storm overhead. Louder this time. Ethan recognized the distant vibration instantly. Engines decelerating through heavy atmosphere. More than one ship. The girl closed her eyes briefly. They brought a guard carrier, she whispered. For one person? Ethan asked. You must be important. She said nothing, which told him enough. A warning tone suddenly chirped from somewhere beneath her torn coat. Both of them froze. The alien cursed softly under her breath in a language Ethan did not understand and quickly reached beneath the fabric near her ribs. She pulled out a small silver device no larger than a pocket watch. Its surface pulsed with red light. Tracking beacon. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. That thing active? I thought I disabled it. Thought. She looked genuinely shaken now. The signal should have died hours ago. Ethan moved without hesitation. He grabbed an old metal feed bucket from beside the stalls and pointed at the device. Drop it in. What? Metal blocks transmission. Maybe enough to buy time. She hesitated only a second before tossing the glowing tracker into the bucket. Ethan slammed the lid down over it and shoved the entire thing beneath a pile of scrap tractor parts near the far wall. The humming overhead shifted almost immediately. The scanning beam outside drifted farther east across the plains, searching somewhere else. For the first time since she arrived, the alien girl looked directly at Ethan without suspicion, only disbelief. You have done this before, she said quietly. Ethan stared toward the storm outside while the blue light faded from the barn walls. No, he replied. I just spent 15 years hauling illegal farming equipment through customs checkpoints. A tiny sound escaped her then. Barely there. Not fear this time. A laugh. The laugh disappeared almost as quickly as it came, but the sound lingered strangely inside the barn. Ethan realized then that it was probably the first genuine laugh she had allowed herself in a very long time. Outside, the storm finally began drifting east across the plains, leaving behind soft rolling thunder and sheets of cold rain sliding down the barn windows. The enormous scanning lights above the clouds faded into the distance one by one until only darkness remained over the fields. Ethan let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. Looks like your friends missed you, he said quietly. The alien girl remained still beneath the thermal tarp wrapped around her shoulders. The weak barn heater painted amber light across her pale blue skin, while steam rose faintly from the soaked fabric of her damaged coat. Without the fear tightening her expression, she looked exhausted more than dangerous now. Ethan walked toward the workbench and grabbed another old blanket from a shelf beside the tractor manuals. He tossed it toward her carefully. You are going to freeze otherwise. She caught the blanket against her chest, but did not immediately use it. You should not trust me this easily, she said. Ethan shrugged while pouring fresh coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. I do. Not. Then why help me? Because trust and kindness are not always the same thing. That answer seemed to quiet her again. Ethan leaned against the tractor tire and took another sip of coffee while rainwater dripped steadily from the barn roof outside. The silence between them no longer felt sharp, just tired, human tired. Somewhere near the loft above them, the old ventilation fan rattled unevenly as power surged through the ancient wiring. "What is your name?" she asked suddenly. Ethan glanced toward her over the rim of the mug. "Ethan Walker." She repeated it slowly, carefully, as though testing the shape of the words. "Ethan, and you?" For a brief second, hesitation crossed her face. Then she looked down at the silver blood staining the towel around her leg. "Lyra." Ethan nodded once. "Well, Lyra, your timing is terrible." Another tiny flicker of amusement appeared near the corner of her mouth. It vanished quickly when pain shot through her leg again as she adjusted position against the beam. Ethan noticed immediately. "Let me see the injury." Her expression hardened on instinct. "I told you before. I can handle it myself." "Sure," Ethan said calmly. "And my tractor can fly if I throw it hard enough." She stared at him for a moment before finally surrendering the argument with visible reluctance. Ethan crouched beside the workbench and retrieved a compact tool case. Instead of medical equipment, he pulled out a small mechanical scanner covered in grease stains and scratched plastic casing. Lyra frowned immediately. "That device is obsolete." "So am I." Ethan switched it on anyway. The scanner beeped weakly before projecting a flickering blue grid over her injured leg. He studied the readings silently. "Good news," he muttered. "Nothing broken. Your machine can barely function. Still works better than frontier hospitals." Lyra watched him carefully while he cleaned the wound with warm water and sterilizing foam. His hands moved slowly and without hesitation. No fear, no fascination, just focus. That unsettled her more than anything else tonight. Most humans either feared alien nobility or obsessed over them. Ethan treated her like somebody stranded on the side of a highway during bad weather. Nothing more, nothing less. "You repaired machines for a living?" she asked quietly. Ethan wrapped fresh thermal bandages around her knee before answering. "Transport ships mostly. Freight haulers. Agricultural rigs. Anything old enough people stopped caring about. And now," he tightened the final clamp gently, "now I fix things that break slower than people do." Lyra looked away after that. The barn suddenly felt warmer than before. Not because of the heater, because the loneliness inside it had shifted somehow. Ethan stood and crossed toward the workbench again, wiping his hands on a rag stained with motor oil. "You can take the loft if you want," he said. "Dry blankets up there. Cleaner than the floor." Lyra blinked in surprise. "You would allow me inside your home?" Ethan looked around the drafty barn with raised eyebrows. "Lady, this is technically where the goats used to sleep." Another soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. This time it lasted longer. And for the first time that night, Ethan noticed the fear slowly leaving her eyes. By midnight, the storm had weakened into steady rain tapping softly across the metal roof, while cold wind rolled over the empty plains beyond Ethan's farm. The barn lights dimmed every few minutes as the old generator struggled against the weather, casting the interior in slow pulses of amber and shadow. Ethan sat cross-legged near the heater with a half-disassembled engine component spread across an oil-stained towel in front of him. Tiny screws and rusted connectors rested neatly beside his tools while the faint smell of solder drifted through the warm air. Across from him, Lyra sat wrapped in 2 blankets beneath the loft ladder, watching him in silence. The plasma knife rested on the floor nearby now instead of in her hand. That alone said more than either of them would admit out loud. Ethan adjusted a cracked circuit board beneath the small work lamp and frowned. "There," he muttered. "Maybe you will stop screaming at me now." Lyra tilted her head slightly. "You speak to machines often?" "Only the ones I cannot afford to replace." She studied him quietly while he worked. Human men were not supposed to act like this. At least not according to everything she had been taught growing up inside imperial courts. Humans were described as impulsive, aggressive, reckless creatures driven by primitive instincts and territorial pride. Yet this one spent his night repairing ancient machinery while making sure a stranger stayed warm. It unsettled her more than threats ever could. Ethan noticed her staring eventually. "You planning to say something, or just silently judge my repair skills?" "Your equipment belongs in a museum." "That bad, huh?" "In the Empire, machines this old are melted down." Ethan snorted softly. "Out here we call that recycling." A faint smile crossed her face again before fading into something more distant. Ethan saw it immediately. "Leg hurting?" She shook her head slowly. "No," but her eyes drifted toward the rain outside instead of meeting his. Ethan set the screwdriver down. Then what? Lyra hesitated long enough for the silence to fill the barn completely. Somewhere above them, rainwater dripped steadily into an old metal bucket with slow, hollow echoes. Finally she spoke. Do humans always live this alone? Ethan leaned back slightly against the tractor tire beside him. Some do. You have no family? Not anymore. The answer came simple and flat without self-pity. Somehow that made it heavier. Lyra lowered her eyes briefly. I am sorry. Ethan shrugged once. Life happens. That is a very small sentence for something painful. He looked at her for a moment after that. Really looked. Past the alien features. Past the glowing eyes and silver hair and elegant voice. For the first time he saw exhaustion that had nothing to do with injuries or running. The kind that settled deep into somebody after years of pretending to be stronger than they felt. You got family looking for you? He asked carefully. Lyra remained silent long enough for him to think she would ignore the question entirely. Then she spoke softly. The Empire does not really allow people like me to have family. Ethan frowned slightly. What does that mean? Her fingers tightened around the blanket in her lap. In the Valari Empire, compassion is considered weakness in leadership. Emotion clouds judgment. Mercy creates instability. Ethan blinked once. That sounds miserable. A bitter smile touched her lips. You are not wrong. The old generator hummed louder as another surge rolled through the wiring overhead. Ethan reached beside him and handed her the coffee mug he had reheated near the heater earlier. Here. Lyra accepted it carefully with both hands. Steam curled upward between them. You know, Ethan said quietly, for somebody raised by space royalty, you look surprisingly impressed by bad coffee. She glanced down into the mug before answering. Where I come from, servants taste royal drinks first in case they are poisoned. Ethan stared at her for one long second. Then he slowly lowered his wrench onto the towel. Okay, he muttered. That might be the saddest thing I have heard all year. For a moment Lyra looked startled. Then something fragile inside her finally cracked. Not dramatically, not with tears, just with silence. Real silence. The kind that comes when somebody realizes another person sees their pain without asking for anything in return. Ethan did not push. He simply returned to repairing the engine part beneath the lamp while rain whispered softly against the roof above them. And sometime after midnight, without either of them noticing exactly when, the barn stopped feeling like a hiding place. The rain finally stopped sometime around 3 in the morning, leaving the frontier plains wrapped in heavy silence broken only by the distant chirping of night insects beyond the fences. Inside the barn, the heater hummed steadily for once, filling the air with dry warmth and the faint smell of burning dust. Ethan sat slouched beneath the work lamp with his sleeves rolled up, tightening the final screws into the repaired engine component balanced across his knees. Across the barn, Lyra had fallen asleep beneath the loft ladder without meaning to. One blanket covered her shoulders while the second rested loosely across her legs. The plasma knife remained untouched beside the wall. Ethan noticed that first. People only slept near strangers when exhaustion finally defeated fear. He glanced toward her again while setting the repaired part aside on the workbench. In sleep, she looked younger somehow. Less royal. Less dangerous. The hard sharpness in her expression had faded into something almost peaceful beneath the amber barn light. Her silver hair spilled loosely over the blanket, while faint blue patterns beneath her skin pulsed slowly with each breath, like distant starlight beneath water. Ethan looked away after a second. Frontier life taught people not to stare too long at things they could not keep. The old clock hanging near the tractor read 3:27 when a sudden crackle burst from the emergency radio across the barn. Lyra woke instantly, hand reaching toward the plasma knife before fully opening her eyes. Ethan crossed the room quickly and turned the volume lower. Static hissed through the speaker before a calm, official voice emerged. Sector 12 residents are advised to remain indoors until military search operations conclude. Unauthorized interference with Imperial personnel will result in federal prosecution. Ethan leaned against the table with a tired sigh. Friendly people. Lyra sat upright slowly, pain tightening her face as pressure returned to her injured leg. They expanded the search grid. Ethan glanced toward the dark barn windows. How long until they start checking farms manually? Lyra hesitated. Hours maybe. Less if they traced the tracker signal here before it vanished. Ethan nodded once like somebody discussing bad weather instead of an interstellar manhunt. Then he crossed toward a rusted storage locker beside the tractor and pulled out an old set of vehicle keys attached to a faded leather tag. Lyra frowned immediately. What is that? My truck. Why are you showing me this? Ethan tossed the keys gently onto the blanket beside her. Road south stays empty before sunrise. Closest city is 90 miles away. If you leave now, maybe you disappear before daylight. Lyra stared at the keys without touching them. You would let me take your vehicle? It barely survives grocery trips. Calling it a vehicle is generous. You know I may never return it. Ethan shrugged lightly. Most people do. Not return things out here. She looked at him carefully then. Really carefully. Like she was trying to understand a language no translator could process. Why would you help somebody you barely know? Ethan leaned both hands against the workbench behind him. Because somebody should have done it for me once. The barn fell silent after that. Lyra lowered her gaze toward the truck keys resting beside her injured leg. If I leave, she said quietly, they may still punish you for sheltering me. Maybe. You do not sound concerned. Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. Lady, last month a tornado took half my chicken coop. At this point, I am mostly negotiating with the universe. A soft sound escaped her again. Not quite laughter this time. Something warmer. Then her expression slowly changed as she looked down toward the plasma knife near the wall. I cannot leave yet, she admitted quietly. Ethan frowned slightly. Because of the leg? Lyra shook her head once. Because if they find me alone, they will take me back. The way she said back carried more fear than anything else she had spoken all night. Ethan noticed immediately. Before he could answer, a low vibration rolled through the barn floor beneath their feet. Both of them froze. Not thunder this time. Engines. Closer than before. Much closer. Ethan moved toward the nearest window and peered outside into the darkness beyond the fields. At first he saw nothing except wet grass shimmering beneath moonlight. Then distant white beams appeared across the plains beyond his fence line. Vehicles. Several of them. Moving slowly through the rain-soaked fields toward the farm. Lyra's face lost all color beneath the blue glow of the heater. They are here, she whispered. Ethan looked at the truck keys on the blanket beside her, then at the approaching lights outside. Finally, he reached over and picked up the old shotgun leaning against the workbench. Not threateningly, just quietly, like a farmer preparing for another difficult morning. The lights outside moved slowly across the soaked fields like drifting ghosts in the dark. Long white beams swept over fence posts, irrigation pipes, and rusted farming equipment half buried in mud. Ethan stood near the barn doors with the shotgun resting loosely in his hands while the low vibration of approaching engines rolled through the ground beneath his boots. Behind him, Lyra pushed herself upright against the wooden beam, every movement tight with pain and rising panic. You need to leave, she whispered urgently. Now. Ethan kept his eyes on the approaching vehicles. Bit difficult with your army parked outside. They are not my army. Her voice cracked slightly. That is the problem. The vehicles stopped somewhere near the outer fence line. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that pressed against the walls before something changed forever. Then a sharp blue light cut through the cracks in the barn siding, scanning slowly across the interior. Ethan reached over and switched off the remaining overhead lamp. Darkness swallowed half the barn instantly, leaving only the orange glow of the heater near the tractor. Lyra's breathing sounded louder now in the shadows. Listen carefully, she whispered. If they find me here, tell them you did not know who I was. Ethan gave a faint, tired look over his shoulder. I still do not. Her expression faltered briefly at that. Before either of them could speak again, a voice echoed from outside through amplified speakers. Calm, controlled, inhumanly precise. Occupant of the Walker agricultural property. This area is now under Imperial Security Authority. Step outside immediately. Ethan rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw. Real polite people. Ethan, Lyra said quietly. Please. He looked back at her then. Really looked. The fear in her eyes was different now. Not fear for herself. Fear for him. That unsettled him more than the armed vehicles outside ever could. Ethan set the shotgun against the wall beside the tractor. Stay here, he said. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. You cannot negotiate with them. Lady, I once argued with a tractor salesman for 6 hours over hydraulic pricing. I can negotiate with anybody. Despite everything, the corner of her mouth almost moved again. Ethan pulled on his old canvas jacket and stepped toward the barn entrance. The cold air outside hit. Immediately once he slid the heavy doors open. Mud soaked beneath his boots as dawn slowly began bleeding gray light across the plains. 3 black armored vehicles stood beyond the fence line, their engines humming softly beneath the rain mist. Above them hovered a sleek silver aircraft without visible markings, suspended silently about 50 feet over the ground. Ethan counted at least a dozen figures moving through the fog around his property. Tall, disciplined, alien. Their armor reflected pale blue light beneath the early morning sky. One of them stepped forward as Ethan approached the fence. Unlike the others, this figure wore a long dark coat over polished silver armor. His pale silver eyes locked onto Ethan with cold precision. Ethan Walker, the commander said smoothly. Human male, age 38. Former cargo mechanic licensed under Colonial Transport Division. Ethan stopped walking. You people really need hobbies. The commander ignored the comment completely. You are harboring a Valari fugitive. Ethan shoved both hands into his jacket pockets against the cold wind. I got goats and a broken tractor. That is about all I am harboring. Several soldiers shifted slightly at the response, though none raised weapons. Ethan noticed something strange then. Nobody seemed aggressive. Tense, yes. Alert, but not hostile. More like men trying to recover something fragile before it shattered completely. The commander stepped closer to the fence. Return her voluntarily, he said quietly, and this property will remain untouched. Ethan studied him carefully. And if I ask what happens to her? For the first time, hesitation flickered across the commander's face. Small, but real. The princess must return to the Empire. Princess. The words settled heavily into the cold morning air between them. Ethan glanced instinctively back toward the barn. Suddenly, the expensive fabric, the tracker, the fear of going back, all of it made terrible sense. The commander followed his gaze. She did not tell you, he observed softly. Ethan looked back toward the armored figures standing in the mist beyond the fence line. No, he answered after a moment. Guess she figured. I had enough problems already. Another silence followed. Wind rolled through the wet grass while dawn slowly brightened across the empty frontier plains. Then the commander spoke again, quieter this time. Human. Ethan met his eyes. Whatever kindness she showed you inside that barn, the commander said carefully. You do not understand what happens if she refuses to come home. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Funny thing is, he replied, I think I am starting to. The commander's words lingered in the cold dawn air long after he finished speaking. Ethan stood silently beside the fence while wet wind rolled across the fields behind him, carrying the smell of rain and engine exhaust through the pale morning light. Beyond the armored vehicles, the silver aircraft hovered motionless above the ground like some giant predator waiting patiently for permission to descend. Ethan glanced back toward the barn again. From this distance, it looked small. Old wood, rusted roof, crooked weather vane barely hanging onto the peak. Nothing about it looked important enough to stand between an empire and its princess. The commander followed his gaze once more. She cannot survive this alone, he said quietly. You know that already. Ethan looked at the soaked dirt beneath his boots. Funny thing is, he muttered, I do not think she is scared of dying. The commander's expression tightened almost invisibly. No, he admitted softly. She is afraid of becoming what waits for her there. Before Ethan could answer, movement appeared behind him. Slow, uneven. He turned instinctively toward the barn just as Lyra emerged from the doorway wrapped in Ethan's old brown work jacket over her damaged clothes. Her injured leg forced her to limp slightly across the muddy ground, but she kept moving anyway. Every armored soldier near the vehicles immediately straightened the moment they saw her. Not with aggression, with discipline, respect, fear. Ethan noticed all three. Lyra stopped beside him beneath the weak, gray light of dawn. Her silver hair moved softly in the cold wind while rainwater dripped from the edge of the barn roof behind them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the commander lowered his head. Your Highness. Ethan blinked slowly. Yeah, he sighed under his breath. Definitely should have charged rent. Lyra ignored the comment entirely. Her glowing eyes remained fixed on the commander. How did you find me? The commander hesitated before answering. You disabled the tracker correctly, but the council anticipated where you might flee. Lyra's face hardened immediately, meaning they monitored every civilian transport route in the outer systems. Yes, including frontier colonies with no military protections. Yes, Your Highness. Ethan looked between them quietly while pieces finally started fitting together in his mind. Wait, he said slowly. You were not running from kidnappers. Lyra's silence answered first. Then she spoke softly without looking at him. I was running from home. Wind swept through the fence posts while dawn brightened gradually across the plains. Ethan noticed then how tired she looked standing there. Not physically, spiritually tired. Like somebody who had spent years carrying expectations heavy enough to crush them from the inside. The commander stepped forward carefully. The council requests your immediate return. Lyra laughed softly at that. No humor in it at all. Requests. The Empire needs stability. The Empire needs obedience. The commander lowered his eyes briefly. The people believe in you. No, Lyra whispered. They believe in the version of me they built. Ethan looked at her then, with quiet understanding settling into his chest. Suddenly the fear of returning made terrible sense. Not prison. Not execution. Something colder. A life where kindness itself had become forbidden. The commander glanced toward Ethan for the first time since Lyra arrived beside him. Human, he said carefully. You have shown remarkable compassion. But this situation extends far beyond your world. Ethan shoved his hands into his jacket pockets against the cold morning air. Yeah, he answered. That is usually how bad situations work. A few soldiers exchanged confused looks at the response. Lyra's eyes flickered briefly toward Ethan beside her. Then something changed in her expression. Small, quiet, but final. She stepped forward slowly despite the pain in her leg and faced the commander directly. No civilian on this property will be punished, she said calmly. That is not negotiable. Your Highness, and Ethan Walker is under my direct protection from this moment forward. Silence crashed across the field harder than the storm had hours earlier. Several soldiers visibly stiffened. Even the commander looked stunned for the first time. Ethan frowned beside her. Hold on, he muttered quietly. What exactly does royal protection mean? Lyra looked at him then. Really looked at him. Her expression softened in a way he had never seen before. It means, she said gently, that nobody in the Empire may harm you now. Ethan stared at her for a long second while wind moved through the wet grass around them. Lady, he said finally, all I did was let you sleep in my barn. Lyra's glowing eyes drifted briefly toward the old, weathered building behind them. Then back to him. No, she whispered softly. You treated me like a person. The sun finally rose over the frontier plains in slow bands of gold and pale gray, washing the soaked farmland in quiet morning light. Mist drifted low across the fields around Ethan's property while the engines of the Imperial vehicles hummed softly beyond the fence line. Nobody moved for several long seconds after Lyra's declaration. The soldiers remained perfectly still in the wet grass, their polished armor reflecting the weak dawn light beneath the hovering silver carrier overhead. Ethan stood beside her with one hand buried inside his jacket pocket, looking deeply unimpressed by the entire situation. Royal protection, he muttered quietly. Do I at least get free medical insurance with that? To Ethan's surprise, the commander's expression shifted slightly. Not annoyance. Something dangerously close to respect. You joke in front of the future ruler of the Valari Empire, he observed carefully. Ethan glanced sideways toward Lyra. She slept beside a tractor engine wrapped in goat blankets. I think we are past formalities. For the first time since the soldiers arrived, a few of them visibly relaxed. Tiny movements. Barely noticeable, but enough for Lyra to see. Her glowing eyes softened for just a moment before the weight returned to them again. The commander stepped forward slowly through the mud until he stood directly before her. Then, to Ethan's complete surprise, the armored officer lowered himself to one knee. Every soldier behind him immediately did the same. Your Highness, the commander said quietly, head lowered against the morning wind. The council will resist your return if your position has changed. Lyra stared toward the rising sun beyond the fields. Then perhaps the council should learn to adapt. Ethan looked between them with growing concern. Hold on, he interrupted carefully. What exactly happens when you go back? Lyra remained silent for a moment, long enough for the distant windmill behind the barn to creak softly in the breeze. Finally she answered, my people believe emotions weaken leadership. They want a ruler who fears nothing and feels nothing. Ethan frowned. And you do not fit that image anymore. Her eyes drifted toward him then. Quiet. Honest. No, she whispered. Not after this place. Something unreadable passed across the commander's face as he slowly rose back to his feet. Your shuttle is prepared, he said gently. Whenever you are ready. Lyra nodded once, though the motion seemed heavier than before. Ethan expected relief to hit him once the danger ended. Instead, a strange emptiness settled into his chest as reality finally caught up with the last 12 hours. The barn would go quiet again after today. No silver-haired alien arguing about coffee quality. No strange conversations beside broken machinery at 3 in the morning. Just wind. Tractors. Silence. Lyra turned toward him slowly. Ethan. Yeah. She hesitated like somebody searching for words far too small for what they meant. I do not think I thank you properly. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Pretty sure royal immunity covers it. A soft laugh escaped her. Real this time. Warm enough to make several nearby soldiers glance at one another in visible surprise. Lyra stepped closer despite the pain in her leg and removed something small from inside the pocket of Ethan's old work jacket. A thin silver emblem no larger than a coin rested in her palm, etched with glowing patterns that shifted beneath the morning light. Keep this, she said quietly. It identifies you under Imperial protection codes. Ethan stared at the object uncertainly. Looks expensive. It is priceless. That usually means expensive. Another tiny smile touched her face before fading again. Then, very gently, she placed the emblem into his rough, calloused hand. Her fingers lingered there for only a second against his skin before she stepped back. No dramatic farewell. No promises. Somehow that made it hurt more. The commander motioned toward the carrier above the fields as the rear boarding ramp slowly descended through the morning mist. Soldiers moved silently aside to clear a path for her. Lyra looked toward the barn one last time. The old wooden structure stood crooked beneath the rising sun, weathered and imperfect and warm in a way Imperial palaces never were. Ethan, she said softly without turning around. Yes. She looked back at him over her shoulder, silver hair moving gently in the wind. For one night, you made me feel more human than royalty ever did. Then she walked toward the waiting shuttle through the wet grass, while the Imperial soldiers rose and followed behind her in silence. Ethan stood alone beside the fence long after the carrier disappeared into the clouds above the frontier plains. The engines faded eventually. The vehicles left. The morning became quiet again. But when Ethan finally returned inside the barn, he noticed something resting beside the old heater beneath the loft ladder. A neatly folded blanket. And on top of it sat his rusted coffee mug, carefully cleaned for the first time in years.